The collapsed walls were found from different excavations all around the city, and they fell outward. It's not just an invading army. There was an army. Even Kathleen Kenyon thought it was attackers that burned the city.
For over a century, the ruins of Jericho have been a battleground for faith and science. The biblical story tells of a miraculous collapse, but the archaeological evidence has been confusing and contradictory, until now. A stunning breakthrough has finally cracked the case, revealing the true cause of the city's destruction. The thing nobody tells you is that the reality is far more violent and disturbing than the story of Joshua's army. The final answer to the Jericho Wall mystery isn't just surprising. To put it mildly, it's a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The city that laughed at armies. The name Jericho echoes through thousands of years of history. It's not famous for gold or grand empires, but for one single spectacular event, the day its walls came tumbling down. You see, this wasn't just any city. This was one of the oldest and most heavily fortified places on Earth. We're talking about a settlement that goes back over 11,000 years, a place where humans built the first ever massive stone tower, a structure so ancient it makes the pyramids look young. By the time the Israelites showed up around 3,400 years ago, Jericho was a beast. Its defenses were the stuff of nightmares for any attacker. The thing nobody tells you is that Jericho didn't have just one wall. It had a whole system of them. First, there was a massive stone retaining wall at the base, over 12 feet high. On top of that, engineers had built a steep, slippery slope of packed earth, rising another 35 feet at a sharp angle. And at the very top of that slope stood the main city wall, made of mud brick, soaring another 20 feet into the sky. All told, an attacker would have to get through a defensive system nearly 7 stories high. To put it mildly, it was considered unbreakable. This is why the biblical story in the book of Joshua is so mind-blowing. It describes an army of former slaves, fresh from 40 years of wandering in the desert, marching up to this super fortress. They had no siege engines, no catapults, no battering rams. From a military standpoint, they had zero chance. The plan they were given was frankly crazy. March around the city once a day for 6 days, with priests blowing trumpets. On the 7th day, circle it 7 times, shout, and watch the walls fall down flat. It sounds like a myth, a fairy tale made up to explain a victory. But when archaeologists finally dug into the dirt, they found something nobody was prepared for. Garstang's astonishing find. In the 1930s, an archaeologist named John Garstang began one of the first major scientific digs at the site of ancient Jericho, known as Tel es Sultan. People were crazy about finding physical proof for biblical stories, and Jericho was the ultimate prize. What Garstang found sent shockwaves around the world. He unearthed the remains of a collapsed mud brick city wall. The most shocking fact was how it collapsed. The bricks hadn't just crumbled. They had fallen outward, down the slope, forming a perfect ramp leading into the city. This lined up exactly with the biblical account, which says the Israelites charged straight before him into the city. But that was just the beginning. As his team dug deeper, they found a thick layer of ash and burned debris spread across the city, suggesting a massive fire had destroyed everything. This too matched the Bible, which states the Israelites burned the city with fire and everything in it. Then came the discovery that sealed the deal for many. In the ruins of the houses, Garstang found large clay jars still filled with grain, wheat, barley, dates, and lentils. This was a wow factor of incredible proportions. You see, in a normal ancient siege, a city would be starved out over months or even years. The food stores would be completely empty. But full jars of grain meant the city fell fast after a very short siege. The Bible says the siege of Jericho lasted only 7 days. It all fit perfectly. Garstang dated this destruction to around 1400 BC, the exact time many scholars believe the Israelite conquest happened. For believers around the globe, this was it. The proof was in the pudding. Archaeology had seemingly confirmed one of the Bible's greatest miracles. Detail for detail. The fallen walls, the massive fire, the full jars of grain. It was a perfect match. The Jericho Wall mystery seemed solved. For decades, this was the story, until one woman's discovery turned it all on its head. The city that wasn't there. Fast forward to the 1950s. A meticulous and brilliant British archaeologist named Kathleen Kenyon arrived at Jericho. She brought with her a much more advanced method of digging, allowing her to carefully analyze the layers of soil, or stratigraphy. What she found was a bombshell that blew Garstang's theory to pieces. Kenyon agreed that a great Canaanite city with massive walls had been destroyed in a fire. The evidence for that was clear, but she disagreed completely on the timing. Using the most advanced dating techniques of her day, primarily by analyzing the styles of pottery found in the destruction layer, Kenyon came to a devastating conclusion. The city Garstang had found was destroyed around 1550 BC. That's a full 150 years before the Israelites, led by Joshua, were thought to have arrived. What many overlooked, according to Kenyon, was that by 1400 BC, Jericho was a small, poor settlement with little to no defensive wall at all. In her view, when the Israelites got there was no great fortress for them to conquer. The famous walls of Jericho had already been a pile of ruins for over a century. This discovery was worse than anyone thought. It didn't just question the details of the biblical story, it suggested the entire event never happened. The story of the marching, the trumpets, and the crumbling walls was just a folktale, created by the Israelites to explain the ancient ruins they saw in the valley. For decades, Kenyon's conclusion became the standard view in archaeology. The Jericho mystery was solved again, but this time the answer was that the legend was a lie. The case seemed closed, but a single piece of overlooked evidence was about to blow it wide open. Worse than a miracle. The debate raged for years, stuck between Garstang's perfect match and Kenyon's "it never happened." But then scientists started looking at the evidence from a completely new angle. An archaeologist named Bryant Wood re-examined Kenyon's own findings. He argued that she had missed key pieces of pottery, expensive imported Cypriot pottery that actually did date the destruction right back to 1400 BC, exactly where Garstang had it. Suddenly, the biblical timeline was back on the table. But this raised an even bigger question. If the timing was right, what actually brought the walls down? The answer came not from digging in the dirt, but from looking at a map. The thing nobody tells you is that Jericho sits directly on top of the Great Rift Valley, a massive geological fault line where two tectonic plates meet. It is one of the most earthquake-prone areas on the planet. Geologists studying the region found evidence of massive earthquakes throughout history. Suddenly, all the weird details started making perfect sense. The story is etched into the very bedrock of Western religious consciousness, the triumphant conquest of Jericho. It's a tale of unwavering faith, divine power, and miraculous victory. According to the book of Joshua, the Israelites, poised to enter the Promised Land, were faced with the seemingly impregnable fortified city of Jericho. Their divine instructions were, from a military standpoint, utterly bizarre. They were not to build siege engines or storm the gates. Instead, they were commanded to march. For 6 days, the army of Israel, led by 7 priests carrying trumpets made of ram's horns, was to circle the city once in complete silence. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times. At the conclusion of the final circuit, the priests would sound a long, piercing blast on their trumpets, and the entire nation would unleash a tremendous shout. The result, as the scripture famously records, was that the wall fell down flat, allowing the Israelites to charge straight into the defenseless city. For millennia, this account has been held up as a prime example of God's direct and supernatural intervention in human affairs. The narrative is simple, powerful, and absolute. Faith and obedience were met with a miracle that defied the laws of physics. But what if the miracle wasn't a suspension of nature's laws, but a masterful and terrifying application of them? What if the Israelites marched around the city for 7 days, and on the 7th day, at the precise climactic moment of their great shout, a powerful earthquake struck? To entertain this possibility, one must first look at a map, not a historical map, but a geological one. The ancient city of Jericho is situated in the Jordan Rift Valley, a massive geological feature that is part of the Dead Sea Transform Fault System. This is not just any piece of land, it is a major tectonic plate boundary where the Arabian plate grinds northward against the African plate. It is, and has been for millions of years, one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. Earthquakes are not a rare or shocking occurrence in this region. They are an inevitable and recurring feature of the landscape. History is replete with accounts of devastating earthquakes razing cities throughout the Levant. To suggest an earthquake could have occurred at Jericho is not a wild hypothesis. It is a geological probability. A deeper look at the event reveals that the miracle might not have been a violation of physics, but a terrifying and perfect application of it. The physics of faith. Given this context, the question shifts from if an earthquake could happen to what the effects of such an event would look like on a Bronze Age city built of mud brick. The biblical description of the walls falling down flat or in its place in the original Hebrew is incredibly specific. This detail, long a point of contention for scholars, finds a stunningly precise explanation in seismology. Excavations at the site of ancient Jericho, most notably those conducted by British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, revealed that the city was protected by a complex system of fortifications. At the base was a massive stone retaining wall, and atop that, further up the slope, was the main mud brick wall of the city. In a typical siege, attackers would ram or undermine a wall, causing it to crumble and fall inward. An earthquake, however, acts very differently. The violent horizontal shaking would have been catastrophic for the tall mud brick structures. The upper walls would have been shaken to pieces, cascading not inward but outward down the slope of the earthen embankment and piling up against the stone retaining wall at the base. In an instant, the very defenses of the city would have transformed into a ramp, creating a path for the Israelite army to scramble straight up and into Jericho, exactly as the biblical account describes. Even more terrifying than the shaking itself is a secondary phenomenon known as soil liquefaction. This occurs when water-saturated granular soil, like the alluvial deposits common in a river valley plain like Jericho's, is subjected to the intense stress of seismic waves. The shaking increases the water pressure between the soil particles, causing the ground to temporarily lose its strength and behave like a dense liquid. Imagine the ground beneath the massive, heavy foundations of Jericho's walls suddenly turning to quicksand. The foundations would sink, slump, and slide, causing the entire superstructure to collapse in a chaotic, instantaneous heap. This isn't a gentle push or a slow crumbling, it is a violent, catastrophic failure of the very earth beneath the city. This level of destruction aligns perfectly with a narrative of divine wrath and overwhelming power. The sight of solid ground turning to fluid and billion-pound walls sinking into the earth would be an unforgettable spectacle of terror and awe, an event far more visceral and dramatic than a simple, invisible divine push. The evidence for a natural disaster, one that matches the scriptural account with chilling accuracy, is overwhelming. This perspective reframes our understanding of divine power, suggesting a God who operates not by constantly violating the natural laws he established, but by commanding them with absolute precision. It posits a universe where physics is an instrument of the divine will, not an obstacle to it. In this view, the 7 days of marching around Jericho were not a nonsensical military strategy, but a profound test of faith and a grueling act of obedience. It was a human clock, a ritual countdown to a divinely orchestrated yet perfectly natural event that had been set in motion since the dawn of time. On the final day, the piercing sound of the trumpets and the great unified shout of the people were not the cause of the collapse, but the final synchronized beat in a celestial rhythm. Their cry would have been instantly drowned out by the deafening, low-frequency roar of the earth tearing itself apart as a precisely timed earthquake struck the Jordan Valley. The human action and the geological cataclysm would have been fused into a single, terrifying, and awe-inspiring moment, forever linking their absolute obedience to the overwhelming demonstration of God's power. It frames a miracle not as a cheap act of magic that breaks the rules, but as the ultimate act of providence, the perfect, breathtaking intersection of God's will with the predictable yet terrifyingly awesome forces of His own creation. Was the fall of Jericho a perfectly timed natural disaster or the signature of a miracle? Did the earth itself fight for the invaders? Let us know what you think below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.